is, oh, let me cut back and catch Maria. All right, I'm moving through my tiles to make sure I get everybody. But Maria, will you introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Maria Morales, and I'm a counselor. I think I've met every single person that's on here, except Diana. I can't recognize you with that mask on. I think we might have met. I'm not certain because usually the face is the cue for me. But anyway, nice to see everyone. Virginia, then is it just me?
I think she froze.
Yeah, it's not my connection, right?
Mm-mm.
Oh,
at least it's a good still.
Because sometimes I'm using my laptop too, and sometimes my connection is a little poor. So I'm like, is it hers or is it mine? And sometimes I have to jump off and use my phone because sadly it has better connection than the laptop. So I wasn't sure if it was me or her. So glad to know it wasn't me.
So moving on, Karina entered. Karina, can you introduce yourself with your name and major?
Yeah, my name's Karina. I'm Diana's sister. I'm computer engineering.
Hi, Virginia. Did you?
I got knocked out, so I'm using my hotspot now. Thank you. Did you jump in, Christian?
We had Karina come and jump in.
Okay, did she introduce herself?
Yes.
Okay, then let's start with our speaker, Francisco Razo, who we were really glad that he was able to join the first Café for the Scientists this fall, 2020. We've been in a very weird, unique world. And I thought, who can we invite that maybe some students already know and who would be willing to hear about what's happening with them and so we thought of you, Francisco. So I want to thank you. And what we wanted to do was in the beginning to say, maybe you can share a little bit about your journey, about, when you transferred to UCSB, then when what happened after UCSB, and then how your job at Amazon is working. So you can kind of use any style you want, but that's kind of the format we wanted you to use, is sort of share a little bit about your journey.
Got it. So what I'll do is I'll speak in chunks. So I'll kind of start off with just like academic journey, post-academic and Amazon, and then I'll pause in between in case anybody has any questions along the way. So I guess we'll start off with academic. I am Francisco Razo Gomez. I started at Santa Barbara City College in 2011. I transferred in 2014 after it with a degree in math, with an associate's in math and English. Following that, I went to UCSB between 2014 and 2016, just with math. After UCSB, I worked at SBCC as a tutor for the EOPS department between 2016 and late 2018. And then I worked with Mesa as a student development specialist between January of 2019 to July of 2019. That's kind of my overall academic journey there. When I was at Santa Barbara City College, I was a part of various programs. The three that really kind of come to mind were Mesa, was TAP, I don't know if that's still there, and then the honors program. And I think through those, I was mentally stimulated from various sides. I think having studied two completely separate things like English and math, it was always hard to kind of like connect the two. And so having different communities where you can kind of talk about certain things was always very beneficial, and definitely taught you different perspectives on different things. And so I think like being with people who studied humanities gives you insight into how they think, which now in my work actually helps a lot versus working with a lot of engineers. It gives you insight into how an engineer thinks. And again, now helps me understand how they think and their processes. Following at UCSB, I will be honest, I was not as involved in Mesa at UCSB because I think Mesa really shifted its focus to more engineering. But other than that, I was pretty involved in my department there. Just a lot of math classes, a lot of office hours, a lot of things along those lines. Many of you guys may know me from tutoring, and that's where after SBCC and UCSB, I tutored at EOPS, where I just did a little bit of everything. Not to toot my horn, except for multivariable calculus, because that's something else. But a little bit of everything there. And then from there, I transitioned over with Mesa, where we did a little bit of the kind of a development specialist part. And that was a nice experience because I always had this goal of teaching, but I never considered academic support. And so it was nice exposure that made me realize that teaching is something I like, but it doesn't have to be so rigid and exactly in the classroom. I think you can teach outside of the classroom context. So whether it's like guiding a student through a certain problem, or even now like organizing training sessions and developing documentation, these are all different ways of teaching that I didn't think before. And so that job kind of really opened up my eyes as to like what exactly is teaching, what exactly is helping. And so this leads to what I do at Amazon. So at Amazon, I'm a senior machine learning data associate, and I'm the training lead for the team. And so what I do, well, let me give you some kind of context on what the team is. So I work on a team called Information Data Operations, and we handle a lot of various data requests. And so I'm speaking very broadly because I can't get too specific with the exact data that we handle. But if it's a data request, we can verify the data, we can collect data, and we can pull interesting metrics from that data to help stakeholders make decisions based on that data. A lot of you guys may have taken stats or may have taken some sort of engineering or even MATLAB, and you see that as you're stress testing anything or really just trying to determine if something works, you'll get a lot of data points. And the issue with all these data points is you can't always make meaningful interpretations from just the data points. You need to understand the statistics. You need to understand nuances of the data to really get the main point of that data. And so that's what we do as a team. What I do specifically is I work on the development and the onboarding of new workflows. And so I'm going to just give you guys a heads up. Amazon has a lot of data. And it's constantly changing. And so as things change, you also need to develop workflows that change to meet your data needs. And so I work with program managers, project managers to develop some of these workflows that process data, create documentation, and ensure that there's proper training further down so that whenever we do get these data requests, we're able to meet them beyond expectations. Additionally, I also work with any people who are onboarded on. So what I mean by that is any new hire that's just starting, because we work with a very particular set of data, requires very specific training. And if just for context, if any of you guys ever look at those job descriptions for Amazon, they're very, very vague. The reason they're vague is because you can't say what we're doing, and we're really a specific skill which isn't concrete. What I mean by that is it could be critical thinking, it could be problem solving. And so my job is to get a new hire who understands problem solving and get them to problem solve within our data sets. So that's that second component of my job, which is going to be how can I help somebody understand what we do, understand the mechanisms of our workflows, understand how they are met, and understand not just completing a workflow and completing a process, but going further and really working throughout their project. Is that my phone? No. Really working throughout that process to potentially find improvements that we overlook just by having done that process just regularly. I will take a quick pause there if there are any questions. No.
I do have a question, Francisco.
Yes.
So we do go back a little bit as we were both students of at the Mesa program. What were your biggest hurdles during your time as a student as PCC?
My biggest hurdle, and it still is my biggest hurdle, is mildly procrastination. I will say I have gotten better, but it is not necessarily better. I think I've just gotten better at working with my procrastination. So now, for instance, if I know I have to work on a document and I know it has to be 2 pages, I know it takes me 3 days. So I will wait those 3 days to do it. Some may call that time management. I really think it's procrastination though. So definitely one of the things that I struggled with kind of throughout was a lot of time management. And as I kind of went through school, I got better at it because I learned how to prioritize certain things. I think sometimes we all fall into this trap where you fall behind on one thing and then we spend that extra time catching up versus trying to stay on pace. And so like one of the lessons that I learned pretty quickly at UCSB was it's like, if you fall behind, let's first keep on track and then step back and catch up versus focusing on catching up, because if that's the case, everything's going to move forward and you're just going to always be catching up. Beyond that struggle, I think the one thing that was really, I guess, that I struggled with, but I think was very beneficial to have undergone was being pulled from all directions by each of your classes. What I mean by that is it's like some days it's like, oh, we have a physics test. Oh, and then the next day it's like, oh, but you also have a math test the day after. And then additionally, you have a chemistry test the day after. And it never aligns in your favor. It's always kind of crummy that everything happens at once. But in the real world, it actually is very much like that, where it's just like, oh, you're working on X project. That's great. Everything's running smoothly. But suddenly Y project is failing. Now you have to kind of dedicate your time to that project and kind of leave X project alone. And so it was a nice thing to struggle with and to learn from earlier on, because I think now, like, you definitely learn to prioritize certain things based on like urgency and based on I guess like on your skill set. And what I mean by that is I think we all know what we are good at. So I can adamantly say I'm terrible at physics. And so I know if I have a physics test, I'm probably going to spend more time studying physics than I will math because I'm stronger in math. And so now in the real world, if I know project X is better under control, if I know I can handle issues with project X much better, then I will kind of hold off on project X and focus on project Y, because I know project Y is going to give me a lot of issues that I know spend extra time to kind of sort out and handle. So those are probably the two biggest things: time management and prioritization of tasks. But I will say, with practice, you get better at it, and it's just a matter of always getting better at it. And so at some point, you'll be floating through. Any other questions? Yes.
Do you still use math in like the data that you use? Because you said you use kind of like, or you have to do like analytical thinking. Are you still using math, or is it more thinking?
Got it. So it's an interesting mix of both. And so let me specify which department I work in. So I work within what we call the Alexa domain. Sorry, I whispered because if it goes off. But I work within the Alexa domain. And so what that means is we use math to measure the quality. Specifically for me, we use a lot of statistics to measure whether certain results are statistically significant. So if you change the way something is being answered, or if you're trying to measure whether the quality is drastically different last week, we use a lot of statistics to see if these changes are natural and inevitable, or if these are changes that are like significantly different that we have to investigate why they're changing. That's a very specific case. For the most part, though, where we really use, I guess, the math is in the critical thinking and the problem solving. In that we can't just solve a problem by pitching an idea. You have to kind of think ahead, very similar to how you do with a proof. Like, what is my end goal? How will I measure success? How am I going to get from A to B to get to that end goal? And so that critical thinking is that component that is underlying math that we use more regularly than the math itself. And I could say the same is true for engineering. As a lot of the engineers, the way we work is that we will always look at a certain problem, and we always just start with a very vague problem. An example of a problem would be like, how do I get this specific experience happening? Like, how do I get better information on COVID-19? Great, like that's your problem. You have to use your critical thinking to determine the best, most efficient, quickest way to just get there. There is no in between. There are no rubrics, no guidelines on how to do it. There's almost like, how do we problem solve with what we have to get there. And so that's where really that math comes in. It's that problem solving, that analytical thinking, that sometimes I think the programming will help, especially I think if, for instance, I work a lot in Excel. So I know that a little bit of like using if loops, for loops, when loops, like it's actually useful because you can do all these things in Excel, but when you do them, it actually saves you tons of time. But that's any other questions? All right. What do I like about the company? What the environment, and what do I like about, I guess, the entire job? I think something that is very unique, and it's not Amazon, but it's very unique, I guess, working in a that handles various data requests. That we're always changing, and what I mean by that is our 9 to 5 is not necessarily the same day every single day. So my typical day on a Monday is drastically different than my typical day on a Tuesday, which may not be drastically different on a Wednesday, but may change significantly on a Thursday. And the reason is that we always have various competing projects. And so with that in mind, I enjoy it because I'm constantly engaged, because I know that I almost don't know what I'm doing tomorrow, but I know how to do it. And so it's definitely a job where you are challenged because you have to be very versatile in the way you can't be dead set on a certain habit, because that habit will be pulled under the rug the next day. In addition to that, with the way we work, and at least the way Amazon works, it's very minimal direction. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of autonomy in how we work. In that example that I gave, it's like we want to improve information on COVID-19. That is the entirety of the project that they will give you. They will be like, solve this problem. And then from there, depending on whether you're working on a team and that project is owned, or this is an individual owned project, you have complete discretion from how you get from A to B. You have the decision of like, I want to take this exact route, I want to take this step, I want to use this data source, and I want to use this because it's Y. Along the way, there is definitely like questioning like, oh, how is X going? However, there is complete autonomy in the decisions you're making. And so there's a lot of ownership over the projects that you're taking. And so that's one thing that I enjoy, is that autonomy, that ability to work without being micromanaged. And really like if you see me with headphones, this is how I work like 8 hours a day. Like I'm just with headphones listening to something else, working on something with very minimal supervision. Any questions thus far on that work style? And that's not necessarily unique to Amazon. It's, I think, something that you will see in just various work environments that are a little bit more fast-paced. No? All right. So then I guess after that, I'll jump into the culture, and I think a cultural fit of a company. This is something that I think is often overlooked. And I think it's because everybody like wants to work at X company, Y company. Like I say, I want to work at Boeing. And that's great. I think it's nice to have ambition, but you also want to make sure you're choosing a company that fits in with your work style and kind of fits in with the idea of work that you have. And what I mean by that is certain companies value certain things. And so let me just highlight one big example. Amazon is a company that has 14 leadership principles. And it's very similar to a mission statement that other companies will have. The difference being is these leadership principles, if you were to look at them, they truly embody how everything is done at the employee level. And so you will not be surprised. Let me give you an example. One of the leadership principles is like, our right a lot. Our right a lot means like you're open to disagreeing with people and you actively seek diverse opinions. You will not be surprised if you are walking around and like you hear somebody say, oh yeah, he's really practicing our right a lot today. And so it's something that really kind of embodies the Amazon culture there. The reason I bring this up is because specifically with Amazon is this is a culture where they want you to openly speak up, and they're very open to respectful disagreement. And so during meetings, they will actively like look for somebody that's like, oh, what are your thoughts on this? And welcome this, like, I wouldn't say combative, but this argumentative kind of meeting style where they want you to raise any concerns earlier on than later on, so that they don't become issues later on. At other companies, an example would be Facebook, they're more collaborative. So they don't want to leave meetings arguing. They want to leave meetings like everybody in agreement. And so this is something where you want to consider where you're going to work, and you want to investigate their company culture, so that wherever you go, beyond just being the name, you're in an environment where emulates the way you work, emulates your leadership style, emulates your working style. And that's going to lead to a much better fit in the longer run, versus kind of taking a job and saying, oh, this is going to be great, and then finding out like, oh, wait a minute, I don't like to openly disagree with people. Maybe I don't want to do that. Or maybe you're saying it's like, I like to disagree with people. Maybe I don't always want to compromise. And so it's something to consider as you're going through. And the reason I'm really kind of bringing this up is because as people apply for jobs and as people go through interviews, at least for Amazon's case, one of the things that's done is we assess candidates on multiple levels. One of them is this kind of professional skill set level. It's like, does this candidate meet the skills to do this role effectively? But the second one is a culture fit. And so like, does this person demonstrate the type of culture that we want to embody as a company? And so anytime you're interviewing, if you can investigate that company's culture, that company's values, the way that company works, and if you align yourself with those things, and if you highlight these things during an interview, that's going to highlight to the interview that A, your homework on the company and you're aware of how the company works. But then B, you've already assessed that you fit in the company, and you're going to demonstrate how I fit in this company based on what's known about their company culture. And so beyond just being like, do I like working at this company? It's more, does the way I work, does my leadership style work in alignment with the company I want to work for? Any questions thus far on kind of that company culture?
Have people ever disagreed with you, and like, how do you feel about people disagreeing with you and the way they've said it to you during the time you've been there?
Got it. I will, let me clarify this. Disagreeing is open. That's another leadership principle. It's called disagree and commit. But it always has to be respectful. And so anytime somebody disagrees with you, what that really does is, so in specific cases that I've had, is it opens up the dialogue of what the issue is. And so oftentimes, let's say I'm working on project X and I make a decision based on just my understanding of project X. That disagreement is going to either open up me to explain my logic behind that decision, at which point it's going to either A, let them know it's like there is a reason behind why X has this particular step, or why X is designed in this particular way. Or on the converse, maybe I don't have experience with a project similar to this, and somebody else has a project, has worked on a project similar to that. And they know that that particular mechanism, that particular process is prone to failure. And so they're saying it's like, hey, this doesn't work. Have you considered this? I'm going to be frank. It doesn't always feel good to have somebody disagree with you. But at the end of the day, we're always working on the tenet that people are kind of nitpicking the idea for positive intent. People are working not to necessarily tear down your idea, but they're working to make your idea stronger by identifying any flaws in your logic or flaws in design earlier on than later on when you've already implemented the project, when you already have a robust project. And then at that point, it's almost a little late, and it requires more time to really solve those issues. So it definitely doesn't always feel great, but it's always nice to know that people are not acting with malice. They're always acting with positive intent.
I meant like you as being your own person. Like, how did you feel about that environment? Was it new to you, or did you feel comfortable?
So me personally, if anybody has known me closely, I will argue just about anything. So I'm completely comfortable with it, but I know this is something that not everybody's comfortable with. And so this is why it's almost like it's good to to reiterate that you want to make sure you're aware of that company culture you're entering, because Amazon is definitely one where like you will get an email. It's like, oh, hey, like this idea may not work because of why, and recognize that like they're not intending it personally. It's just like they're really just like, this is the idea. This is what's kind of wrong with it. Let's fix it. So just the fact that I'm okay with it exemplifies that like I can fit into this company culture well, and it's not an issue for me. But if it's something that you're not open to, or if it's something that you know you're uncomfortable with, that's something you're going to want to consider preemptively before looking at this particular company. But varying companies will just have varying. So another example would be I have a friend who worked at Safran, which made Boeing, which made seats for Boeing. Their company culture was a little bit different. It was an older company. It wasn't as, I guess, tech savvy per se as Amazon. And so culture-wise, they were more hierarchical, where disagreement wasn't always open. And so with that in mind, that was something that friend wasn't comfortable with, because this is a friend who would actively disagree with people. And so it wasn't a good fit for them. And so in the end, it didn't work out for them. But that's something that they kept in mind. Like, do I want to stay at a company where I know I'm not comfortable opening up my mind because there may be repercussions, or it's just not accepted within that company culture?
And Francisco, what about the learning curve for you? I mean, you walked into this company and you were excited. How did you get your balance or your direction of how to do your job?
Got it. So this is an interesting question. Just because I now have both sides of the perspective, both as the person who started and now as the person who kind of prepares people to onboard and to ramp up into like a full production setting. So when I started, at the moment, I thought it was very slow. And I thought, like, why are we taking so long? So the way we start is very, very slow, very methodical. And that's because a lot of what we work on is very specific to the company. It's very internal. And a lot of these skills we can't expect others to have, because these are mechanisms, these are processes that we developed for the particular devices that we make. With that in mind, at that moment, I was frustrated. Like, why are we not moving fast enough? Why do I feel like I'm not learning so much? And the reason is we want to kind of accustom you to that development. So my initial learning curve was, it's like, can we just start already? However, once I guess full production started and once I knew everything, that's when kind of the learning curve hit. And this is where it's more of like a velocity that really kind of impacted me personally, which is that we spend this time to ramp people up so that they are prepared, they have the skills to excel in their role. However, once they enter production, we are very good at just being like, okay, you are ready, go. And so oftentimes what we'll have is that project management of like, you have to manage X project, Y project, Z project. We assume you already know these things because as we're hiring, we're already looking for these things. We're screening for these things. And so it was a little bit of a shock to me to be like, okay, we helped you through this process, but now we're just going to let you go. Go handle 3 projects, knock yourself out. However, I will say it was a shock, but it was a learning experience nonetheless, because not only do you get very good at kind of your project management and your time management, but you also become very good at how do I say this so you become very good at admitting when you don't know how to do something. That's just one thing. If you don't know how to do something, just say, hey, I've never done this before. I don't know how to do it. If you teach me how to do it, I'll gladly learn it. So that's one thing. Don't say you know how to do it for certain, because sometimes they'll be like, oh, I know how to do this. And then it's like, here's an entire project on it. So one thing you learn, make sure that you know what you know and make sure you know what you don't know. The second thing is always know when to escalate. I think one of the issues that people have, and I think that particularly me, is that I think sometimes you want to take ownership over something. And that's like, it's great because it definitely shows that like you have control of the situation and that you understand the project and you understand the goals. However, sometimes you get issues that are out of your control. And these are issues that you cannot control because, frankly, this is a problem you've never seen, or this is just an issue that you don't know how to fix. So one of the things that I learned very early on was escalation, which is know when to ask for help. Know when to reach out to your manager or your project manager or a stakeholder and be like, hey, something isn't working here. Why isn't it working? Because sometimes it might not be working because of a larger issue, like, oh, that system is down for today. There's a trouble ticket to fix it. Other times it might just be like, oh, no, you're just doing this wrong. Let's resolve it now. And so those are two big things that I think were shockers after that initial slow training that definitely caught me off guard, that I wasn't used to, but that now I'm very grateful they happened very early on, because as you kind of progress further in your role and you develop in your role, regardless of where you are, they're expected of you.
Okay, I have one more question. Hopefully you guys are still thinking of questions to ask Francisco. I know that you you were more interested in academia, right? You're a math major. You also had a love for English, and having to make, this decision of where you wanted to go. And I know we had a conversation when the opportunity for Amazon came your way, because it was industry, it was corporate, not academia, not education. Can you tell us how you felt about this whole process, about making the decision to maybe take a job at Amazon and go in a different direction that you hadn't thought about?
Absolutely. So that decision, I think, was an interesting decision for me, because I think since I started, and you can ask Virginia this, I think since I started in 2011 at Santa Barbara City College, I said I want to teach math. So like, it wasn't a one-off decision for me to say that I want to teach math. It's like, I've always kind of known I wanted to teach math. And I secretly hope that maybe in retirement, I want to teach math as well. However, we'll get to there. But what really opened up this role for me was, I think, frankly, so I don't know how aware everybody is about like the politics involving hiring, and then I guess just the arduous process to become a full professor at any four-year institution, two-year institution, etc. But a lot of you guys may have had teachers that are called adjuncts. And so these are, I guess, contractual employees that are hired to teach a specific course for a certain session. And so as I kind of saw how that was growing in prominence, I realized that this is a career that, even though I love and even though I want to do it, there may be some economic obstacles that may stop me from really getting to where I want to go. And so that's when I considered, maybe let me try something corporate. And let me see if it works out. And so that's where Amazon started. And frankly, I didn't even think I'd get the job. I just like applied. I said, it's like, well, they don't ask for, and this is the real reason I applied. Well, they don't ask for a cover letter, and I don't want to write a cover letter. They just want a resume. So I'll just send the resume. And that's all. That's the reason I applied. I think if they would have asked for a cover letter, I may have hesitated more. But that was the reason. It's like, they don't have a cover letter requirement. Let's send the resume over. That was the initial reason I applied there. But kind of my thought process for accepting the job was, well, let me just try something different, where maybe I'm not doing exactly what I want to do, but it's still combining various interests of mine. And so the reason I was very open to this position is because we're working with the Alexa devices. And so we still had that mix of like, okay, I still work with language. I still work with a lot of that writing. I still work whether determining that meaning is maintained. And yet I still can do kind of that analytic side that comes with the math. And so that was the reason I was very open to this particular role. After having done this job for a year, I can say that the environments are completely different. I think like entirely different in terms of pace. I think it's a much quicker pace at Amazon. In terms of demographic, it's a much younger demographic at Amazon. In terms of just like access to resources, it is very different at Amazon. The way I can clarify this is, if anybody's been downtown, they just rented out that former Saks building at the corner of Carrillo and State. That was not a cheap building. So it's just like, wow, these guys, like look at them just throwing money over there. So it's definitely a different environment. But I will say it satisfies the one thing that I like, which is I like being constantly busy. I like being like kind of masochistic, but I like being kind of on edge of like, okay, doing one thing, following another. And so it fixes that for me because I find that the work I'm doing is engaging. It interests me both in the writing and in the, I guess, in the subject matter. But then it also interests me because I'm not bored of just repeating one task regularly. I know that once I'm finished with this project, once we've kind of brainstormed this idea, we've really set up the execution and we've really deployed it, we've rolled it out, then another project comes up that may just be a completely different issue that we have to resolve. And so this constant problem solving is, I think, what I really loved about it, that I still get with math. It's just in a different way. With math, it's problem solving that like, oh, here's problem 29, like do it. Here it's like, okay, here's project Z, do it. And so that problem solving is kept there, but I think the environment is something that I've grown to like. And I guess I didn't know and I didn't consider because I wasn't aware of how different it was. Any other questions?
Do you plan on sticking around at Amazon for a while and maybe changing positions? Or do you plan on going to another company, doing something different?
Got it. So, so right now I focus on training. But what I've realized in kind of doing training is that training is very, very good because you get to work with stakeholders to kind of help develop all these things. So I work closely with stakeholders to not only kind of design the processes or the mechanisms that we're going to implement, but also on the documentation of it, also on kind of the training, the rollout of any training, and then at some point, usually serving as kind of the point of contact for that entire like service. The one drawback, and I think is something that I want to move kind of further on, is that as I'm working with stakeholders, we're very much working with the goals of the stakeholder versus like my own goals for a particular project. And so I still have a lot of autonomy, but it's usually autonomy within a given framework, which is if that stakeholder is focusing on, let's improve the number of questions that are answered, then my focus, even as I'm kind of taking control of a particular project, is how is this going to improve the number of questions that we're taking on? So long term, I would like to transition more into maybe like a program management role where I can take a little bit more initiative, not only on kind of the execution, but really like the entire goal of the project. And so the one benefit that we have at Amazon is that it's such a big company that that you can really scale and move up in various directions. It's just a matter of kind of clarifying with your manager, like what are your goals within this role? Where do you plan on developing within this role? And then additionally, working with them to develop the skills and working with them to develop the connections within the company to move in that direction. And so ideally, yes, but I want to go in a very particular role, which is program management. However, if Amazon isn't kind of fruitful with that, then I would consider other companies or even back to academia where I could do kind of program management and take from start to finish.
I have a question.
Yes.
What type of technical skills like do you want to improve on, like in Amazon, so you can move on, later in life?
Got it. So with Amazon in particular, so program management is very interesting because it's there are two branches of it, which is technical program management, and then there's just regular program management. Technical program management is usually program managers that take leads over engineering projects. And so if you want to develop a new device, like from the hardware, that would be technical program management. However, on the other end, if you want to develop a new system to measure like accuracy of answers, that's a different type that doesn't require that technical understanding of hardware or engineering. So I don't want to really go into technical program management just because that that introduces a lot of issues. And the issue that really comes up with technical program management is there's all these extra issues of tooling, which is like, okay, if I want to develop hardware, now you have to deal with the actual creation of the hardware. And so that's something that I don't want to deal with. However, if I did decide to go into technical program management, that usually will require more of a technical background within the kind of department that you're in. So if, for instance, I'm working on devices, I would need a technical background in some sort of engineering, probably electrical. However, if I'm trying to develop a new software tool, that would probably require for a technical program manager more of a CS degree, something with a software engineering. The way I'm working though is more of a the way I'm thinking in long term is just a non-technical, which will do very similar things. However, we don't focus on developing technical products. We focus more on designing programs that meet certain goals that cannot be met by a tool. So an example of this would be like Virginia manages Mesa. You guys are not tools. You guys are people. And so you guys require different mechanisms to get you guys to succeed. And so that would be a non-technical program management where she's managing something that doesn't require technical expertise in a given field. Things to develop for that skill, writing. Amazon is a very writing heavy company culture. We don't do PowerPoint. If you want to get an idea across, if you want to convince somebody that you want to do something, if you want to set up a goal, you write it. You write what your goal is. You write how you're going to measure success. You write when you're successful, and you write every step in between. And so a lot of that has to do with ensuring that if I'm away from the office, or if somebody in another country looks at my plan, they can understand what I'm doing without me explicitly telling them what I'm doing. And so that requires practice, because we like to write succinctly. We like to write very precisely, and kind of your words carry a very heavy weight. And so one of the skills that I'm kind of in the process of really developing is business writing. In addition to that, it's really exposure to project management itself. And so the more projects that I work on, that's more exposure. That's can give me additional learnings that I can apply later on. However, that kind of comes with time. It's not something that I can be like, oh, I want to learn how to manage new projects. It's more of a, here's a new project. How do we manage it? And so those are the two, I guess, key learning things. Tooling wise, there are like some minor tooling things. Like it's really good to know databases, specifically SQL. Excel is a good tool. So if you know Excel, like that's even better. PowerPoint's a great tool. Even though we don't like present our ideas in PowerPoint, oftentimes you will make like posters in PowerPoint. And so it's nice to know how to finagle that. And then Word, you have to know how to use Word, because beyond just writing, everything is critiqued on format. So is your format clear? Is it concise? Does it flow naturally? Does it make sense? Little things like that, that even though I think we overlook in school, in the professional world, some people place a heavy weight on that.
Francisco, your colleagues, what kind of degrees do they all have? You know, because you're a math major, but obviously there would be CS majors working there. Who do you work with?
So specifically, this isn't, so our team is, even within the team, there's like multiple branches. And so I work with people who come from journalism backgrounds and who are writing actual content for devices. I work with people who come with MBAs. I work with some people who are engineers, mostly mechanical for some reason, but who do a lot of project management from a mechanical background. There's a lot of people who have English degrees, and that's because our team has an editorial branch where if there's ever content that needs to be created and we can't, like, we don't have databases for this content. An example of this would be like COVID-19. If you asked us in February if we had a database for COVID-19, we didn't. Nobody did. And so this is where that editorial kind of team comes in. And so it's a very interesting environment, because at least within our role, we're really hiring based on that skill. And then if you have that additional like technical knowledge, then you really get kind of filtered into specific roles that require a little bit more technical knowledge. So I couldn't like with certainty say we hire like only engineers, because it's really a varied background, very, very varied. The last, and so like another example here is like we have an entire team of like Spanish, like people who just majored in Spanish. And that's because they're working on content that's for Spanish speakers. And so right off the bat, we hire based on the skills that we're looking for at the moment. And so some degrees might have that skill, others might not.
Any other student want to ask a question? One of the things I would like you guys to get a chance to ask one question. Remember, it wasn't that long ago that he was a student. So you can even go back to his experience while at SBCC or at UCSB, or about having to, make decisions as he was moving along, So is there any other questions? I haven't heard from Armando Ibarra. I haven't heard from Sammy. We haven't heard from Diana. We want it to be interactive. Annalie? There's a question.
What are some skills we should develop as an undergrad? Ooh, that is a great one. Frankly, and this is going to be one that, so SBCC has a business writing course. I would say that is a skill that if I would have known earlier on, it would have been much more beneficial. Multiple times, at least when I started, I had to write documents, and I never realized how poorly written they were. And not because they were like oh wow, like really bad grammar. It's just because in school you're accustomed to a certain writing style, which is kind of this literary writing style where you want to write to explain yourself. However, in the business world, it's like, no, we don't want to write to explain yourself. You want to write to the point, like get to the point, be very precise. Don't use any additional language that you don't have to, because you want to be very clear. And so that's something that I wished I learned kind of earlier on as I was an undergrad. It's just like write with a lot more precision, write with a lot more intent versus trying to fill the page. And so that's one of the things right off the bat. Second thing, a lot of you guys are doing engineering, and it's like great that we all learn all this like fun engineering, CS, like MATLAB, whatever languages you do, whatever tools you learn. However, one of the, I guess, key tools that exists in the professional world is SQL, which is a data management system. Highly recommend taking a class on that, because you'll start looking at these jobs and it'll say like, okay, they need an understanding of MATLAB, they need an understanding of C, C++, Java, Python, whatever it is, whatever specific tool to that engineering is. But then if you kind of even go down, like in their preferred, they'll have like knowledge of databases. And so that's something that often isn't kind of discussed, or it's not even included in any of the requirements. It's like, okay, do you know how to work with a database? It's like, that's a skill that SBCC also offers a course. I think it's like CIS 117. And that's a course that's going to expose you to what SQL is. And so when you see it in the professional world, you're like, I know what that is. So that's another thing that I think that I wish I would have had earlier on. Final thing, I guess, interviewing. I wish, and this is my mistake. When I was at UCSB, I didn't go to the Career Center often enough. But if you can expose yourself to as much kind of interview prep preemptively, I think that's going to be very useful. Just because we all kind of get jobs, and we're accustomed to like, oh, that interview style. It's like they're going to ask me like, oh, like tell me 3 things about yourself. We're like, cool. They're going to be like, tell me about yourself. Great. However, as you're applying to these more technical roles, in addition to being interested in yourself and your skills, they're really interested in how you handle certain situations. So the interview style will change pretty significantly from questions like, tell me about yourself, to tell me about a time you had to disagree with a colleague. How did it go? And so at that point, they're really asking, it's just like, okay, like, does this person know how to cooperate with others? Does this person know how to raise any concerns in a kind of cordial way? Does this person know how to problem solve with multiple people? These are questions that we're not often exposed to, or don't know how to answer when initially asked. So if I would have like just gone to the Career Center earlier on and been exposed to that interview style, I think it would have been much easier than stressing the day before an interview and being like, what am I going to do? And so those are a couple of things that I wish I would have done as an undergrad that really would have helped me kind of now be where it is.
What are like some of your study tips? Do you use some of your study techniques for like approaching your projects now? Or do you think the way you're approaching everything is very different to the way you would approach assignments and stuff during college or university?
I would say the biggest study tip that I would still use is breaking up these big chunks, like big projects, into small chunks. What I mean by that is sometimes you just have like this overarching thing that's like, oh, I need to study for a test. And it's so like big and broad that you don't handle it because you don't know where to start. And so you're like, well, where do I start? Do I start with chapter 10? Do I start with chapter 13, etc.? One of the things that I used to use, it's just like definitely define a starting point. Like say, I'm going to start with X and then I'm going to jump into Y, then I'm going to jump into Z. That's proved really useful now because now when I'm given this very vague project, I don't just kind of sit there and be like, how am I going to handle this? Where am I going to start? It's more of like, okay, where can we start and what are the steps leading up? So chunking these huge projects into smaller tasks has really been useful, especially in an environment where there's a lot of ambiguity. That's a big one. Time management. So like I said, I procrastinate. I'm aware of how much time it takes me to effectively procrastinate. You'll never hear those two in one sentence again. And so I know, for instance, if I have a presentation, it'll take me like 2 hours to prepare that presentation. And so knowing that preemptively has helped me kind of just do regular tasks here, just kind of at Amazon. So if I know I have to check emails, it's just like, okay, I know email checking is going to take me maybe 20 minutes. So I'll just do that at the beginning of the day before anything. Or if I know, for instance, that I have to reach out to a colleague and I know we usually have longer conversations, and I'll be like, okay, I'll reach out to them after I finish this project that needs to be done by noon, because I know if I were to call them before, it's going to throw me off. So just a little bit of that time management. One thing is I will have to head out now. I hate to be so abrupt. It's just I have a meeting at 3. So any final quick questions? Interview question that really stumped me. Oh, this is a, let's see. Okay, this is an interesting one. And this is what's a project you're most proud of? It'll stump you because it'll definitely let them know what projects you like and the type of projects you don't like. I think a lot of context will be like, oh, I like projects where I'm autonomous. That already gives away that, okay, he does not like to be overly managed. Or on the other end, it's just like, oh, I like projects where I have, oh, okay, hold on. Or I could say like, oh, my favorite project was organizing this event. That kind of gives you insight into like, okay, this person likes working with people. And so that was one that's particularly stumped me. It's just like, what project are you most proud of? Because it's going to dig at kind of your working style. It's going to dig at how you prefer to work. And it's going to dig at like what you consider an accomplishment. All right, with that, I have a conference call coming in at 3. This is totally normal for me, so so I apologize for this. If you ever want to follow up, let me know, and I will gladly follow up.
Francisco's very available to you all. So, and I know he's helped students with questions in the past. We're going to let you go. I want to thank you for taking the time to share your experience with us. All right. And I get it about too many meetings. So no problem. Thank you all. Thank the students too for taking the time to listen. And I'll be sending a little quick evaluation so that you can give me some feedback, which hopefully I'll pass on to Francisco as well. Okay, thanks, Joe, our new student. I want to thank Joe. Okay, but everybody else. All right.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Have a good day.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.